produces eggs and also major source of female sex hormones. We're looking at a section through an ovary. This happens to be a cat ovary. Now you should be able to identify several layers here. On the very outside is a single layer of cuboidal epithelium. Single layer of cuboidal epithelium. So it's simple cuboidal epithelium. It's this dark kind of yellow line right here. What do we call that? You also see it on the model of the ovary, that pink outer layer. What's it called? The germinal epithelium. An unfortunate name because you think something's germinating or beginning there. It's not. It's just this outer surface layer. Just deep to that is the actual capsule you see here. That's dense connective tissue. Now what's it called? The capsule around the ovary? Tunica albuginea again. Same as the name of the capsule around the testes. Now there are two regions of the ovary which you've been able to identify. The outer region, where the follicles develop, which we see here, is called what? It's the cortex, okay? This area where you see the follicles developing, that's cortex. The inner region, we have a lot of blood vessels and connective tissue, but no follicles, like we have in here, that's the medulla. You see that in a lot of organs. Outer cortex, inner medulla. You should also be able to recognize the follicles. 3 distinctive follicles. And the most numerous, at least well developed, the most immature that is, and more usually to the outside of the cortex, are called what? What kind of follicles are these? What do we call it? Primordial follicles. As I said, a female is usually born with all the primordial follicles she'll ever have. Usually hundreds of thousands in human females. And before she goes through puberty, becomes sexually mature, a lot of them have degenerated already. But once she goes through puberty and her menstrual cycle begins, then every month, in human females roughly, as you know, these follicles begin to develop. And they develop and grow into a larger multicellular structure, which is called a primary follicle. You see one right here. What appears to be the nucleus of cell and cytoplasm is actually the developing egg cell, the oocyte. So each follicle has an oocyte or developing egg cell within it, but they do not develop at the same rate. When a follicle is mature and ruptures to release the egg at ovulation, it's mature, but the egg is not. And that egg is released as what's called a secondary oocyte, and it will not mature until what happens? It's got to be fertilized. The sperm cell must enter the cytoplasm. Where does that normally occur in humans? Fertilization. In the oviducts, okay? Sperm is usually deposited in the vagina during intercourse. The sperm has to swim up the vagina, up into the uterine cavity, then go up the oviduct or fallopian tube to come in contact with the egg. That's why the sperm must be modal. They got to move, okay? The egg's coming down, but if it's not, the sperm doesn't fertilize it, it degenerates and passes out the menstrual flow. Okay, so there's a primary, okay? And the primaries continue to develop in larger follicles, like we see here. And here's a classical example of a well-developed secondary follicle. Now, the secondary follicle has multiple layers of cells around the developing egg cell, technically. But to make it easy for you, you can make sure it's a secondary follicle. I'll show you one that's better developed that has a fluid-filled cavity. What's that cavity called? Only found in secondary follicles. This thing. That's the antrum, okay? And here is the egg cell again. It's called an oocyte. There's a nucleus and cytoplasm. These are the membranes around it, the zona pellucida, and a group of cells of the follicle that remain with the egg. What are these cells called? The corona radiata. Remember, a sperm cell has to penetrate the corona radiata of the zona pellucida to get into the egg cytoplasm to accomplish fertilization. And that's why sperm cells have to have digestive enzymes in the head and that acrosome to literally digest their way in through these barriers to get to the egg cell to accomplish fertilization. Collectively, the cells of the follicle are called what? Granulosa cells. And those granulosa cells that surround and remain with the egg, even at ovulation, are called corona radiata. Okay? So I'd like you to be able to identify. So this is secondary follicle. And here's some more. You can see a lot of antrums, because remember this is a cat, and cats and any domestic animals have multiple litters. Here's another antrum, and the secondary follicle has just been cut so you don't see the developing egg. There's a lot of them here. See, here is a secondary, early secondary starting to develop. The antrum through the cells of the follicle, that's the developing egg cell, the ovocyte, and the corona radiata around it. And up here again, you've got your primordial follicles, or toward the edge of the cortex, outer part. There's another antrum. There's another antrum. And there's one too. These would all be secondary follicles. Here again, there's a secondary follicle. You see a little bit of the developing egg cell on that one. There's more primordial follicles. Okay. And so on. There's another. You're like a late primary. There's a secondary comparison. Okay. Any questions? Okay, this next slide is also ovary, but got a little bit of the oviduct attached to it, which is what this is. The ovary is right by it. Here in the section through the ovary. Again, you're going to see a lot of stuff, same stuff you saw in the previous slide. A lot of primordial follicles here, more toward the outside of the cortex. Then you see some secondary follicles. Here's one that's kind of broken up. There's the oocyte nucleus and cytoplasm. There's the corona radiata. These are cells of the follicle, effectively the granulosa cells of the secondary follicle. There's another more mature secondary follicle with a larger antrum. Again, there's the oocyte and developing egg cell, corona radiata, there's the antrum, and again the granulosa cells of the follicle. And then something else, this structure right here. What is this? What's it called? What happens after ovulation? The egg's released, but most of the follicle remains behind. Develops into this structure under the influence of hormones. What is this structure? This is the corpus luteum, literally Latin for yellow body. There's kind of a yellowish cast to it. What's its function? What does it do? It's a major source of female sex hormones. As the follicles are developing, they're producing sex hormones, particularly estrogens. That helps to build up the female body in preparation for possible pregnancy. Endometrium, the line of uterus, builds up. Mammary glands start to develop, preparation for lactation. So this secretes estrogens as a developing follicle, but also a lot of progesterone. Progesterone sort of puts the finishing touches on the female body, readying it for pregnancy. And the progesterone is what maintains the endometrium, uterine lining. There are two hormones that maintain this structure. What are they? What's the first one that maintains this corpus luteum? It's gonadotropin, luteinizing hormone, LH. But if there's no pregnancy, because the high levels of estrogen and progesterone have been developed basically by the, or given off by the developing follicles, this basically inhibits the release of the gonadotropins, FSH, follicle-stimulating hormone, luteinizer. So luteinizing hormone falls off. As a result, this degenerates, and the hormones produced by this are reduced, including the progesterone. So as progesterone levels fall off, the endometrium degenerates and sloughs off, you got the menstrual flow. So if there's no pregnancy, after about a week and a half or 10 days, this degenerates. And with it then, the endometrium or uterine lining, and you get the menstrual flow. Soon after that. If there is pregnancy, the second hormone that maintains this corpus luteum comes into play. And what is that hormone? That's a hormone produced by cells around a developing embryo that also maintain the corpus luteum. HCG, human chorionic gonadotropin. What cells produce it in the developing embryo? It's actually cells around the embryo. What are they called? What cells produce HCG? The trophoblast cells. Okay, those are the cells on the outside of the blastocyst. Inside is your developing embryo, the so-called inner cell mass, which eventually flattens out with embryonic disc, and then you get differentiation when you go through gastrulation. Okay? So two hormones maintain this. Initially, LH, luteinizing hormone, and secondly, with pregnancy, HCG. That's also the hormone you test for in a pregnancy test. It's only produced by cells around the embryo, so women don't normally produce it. Men obviously don't produce it. Only a pregnant woman, because it's not the woman's body's producing it. It's cells around the embryo, the trophoblast cells. Okay? Any questions?
Yeah.
Yes?
How will you tell the difference between the corpus luteum and the corpus albicans?
Corpus albicans, well, the albicans usually smaller, kind of shriveled up. I don't have a good slide of that. So I point some out to corpus luteum. However, in the models I could. There you can see it. It's the white, smaller thing. Corpus albicans is literally white body. Okay? But this is corpus luteum. And once the corpus luteum degenerates, it shrivels up, the scar tissue becomes the corpus albicans. And you can see it on the models. Okay? So if I'm asking you that, it won't be on the slides, it'll be on the models. Okay? So make sure you take a look at the ovary model. Any other questions on the ovary? All right, let's take a look now at the tube that carries the egg at ovulation